afternoon, and welcome to our staff forum. It is wonderful to see so many familiar faces, but I think what is even better, I was telling one of the other staff council members, what's even better is seeing so many unfamiliar faces. It's just remarkable how many staff we have on campus and how many of you I've never met before, but I look forward to the opportunity. My name is Carol Brown. I'm the staff council president this year, and my term will end in about a month. And Karen Altus, who is our staff council president-elect, is not with us today. But I would like the other members of our staff council who are present to stand. And here's one up here. And Sarah and Teresa are in the back. So I just wanted you to recognize them, these people. Some of them have been members of staff council for 2 years. And it's a 2-year term, and some of them are rolling off the council with a new set of people coming on in June. And the two councils, this year's and next year's, will be kind of interfacing over the summer just to ensure a smooth transition and make sure things move forward. So if you're interested in being involved with staff council or issues, we were thinking about creating some committees on special topics. Just contact me or Karen or any of the staff council members you see on the sheet and let us know. We hope to move forward some interesting initiatives and projects and ideas for next year. I mentioned this at our winter forum that we're here to engage you in conversation and provide opportunities for fellowship, to empower you with information as in today's forum so you can make informed decisions, and to equip you with tools you need to perform effectively. And also, as we will tomorrow, to recognize your service and your achievements. I am really pleased and honored, really, to have these two gentlemen here today, Don Mortensen and Gary Wolmostuff. They are going to talk about staff compensation and staff compensation. What are the three? Compensation, salaries and training. I was thinking compensation and salaries are the same thing. But anyway, they've got just an incredible amount of information that is important for you as a staff member to know so that you can be an advocate for yourself when you're talking to your supervisor each year when that salary time comes around. So without further ado, I will turn it over to these two gentlemen.
All right, thank you for being here. And let me just put a quick plug in to something that Carol just mentioned, and that is that tomorrow is our annual President's Spring Forum, Years of Service Awards. We've got some very interesting things happening tomorrow, including, I'll give you a clue, 3 people who are getting 40-year awards, which is highly unusual. And so please be there to congratulate. Maybe some of you are also getting your 5, 10, 15, 20, 25, 30, or 35-year awards tomorrow as well. So that'll be over at the gym, and that'll be at the new time. It's different if you've been here a few years. It's at 11:10, which is sort of the new chapel time, rather than earlier as we've had in years past. So be there, and I think we're going to have a fun time. So thank you for inviting us today. We are going to cover a couple of, get back to this, a couple of topics here today. We're going to spend quite a bit of time on number 1, staff salary and compensation, trying to understand how does our salary process here work. How can you be a part of understanding your own salary and talking to your supervisor as necessary about how that works for you. We're also going to touch a little bit at the end on some staff training and development ideas that are coming our way soon. And we'll have some time for questions and answers on all of this as we go along. So we're going to start with the staff salaries and compensation. We got some advanced questions from Carol's survey of staff about how some of these things work. So we're going to try and touch on most of the topics that were suggested to us. How are salaries determined? What's my salary range, and is that even important? What's the difference between exempt and non-exempt? We're going to touch on that just a little bit. How does staff get a raise? Of course, it's what everybody would like to know. So what we'd like to do is make this a bit of a conversation. Yes, there's a lot of material we'd like to cover, we'd like to present, but at the same time, as we go through, particularly some of the, shall I say, more complicated slides, it may raise a question. In fact, I'm sure it will raise a question. Feel free to ask. We're going to have a rover somewhere, I think, with a microphone. Is that right? Do we have somebody back there with the microphone? That will bring it to you, and so we can all hear the question and the answer. And so feel free to ask those questions as we go, in other words, not just say them up at the end, by which time you've probably forgotten the question. So we'll do that, and we're going to start with Don and the staff compensation salary.
Thanks, Gary. Good afternoon, everybody. I'm a little nervous about doing a presentation right after lunch. Some years ago, I was up at Casey with my directors, and I had a session right after lunch, and I was waxing eloquent about something, I don't remember now, on a flip chart, and I turned around and looked at I think I had about 6 or 8 directors. Every one of them had their eyes closed. So I'm going to be checking. Well, I'm going to give you a little bit of a quick background of the compensation plan we have, get into some of the specifics of it, and then show you some illustrations. And then Gary's going to talk about the actual job classification process. We're talking about compensation, but really the focus today is on the salaries, how we determine what salary each individual will get, and particularly how what drives that process. And the compensation, of course, is made up of salary and benefits. And another session could be done on the benefits, but in general, SBU's benefit package is very similar to most of higher ed. And we've been focused on that for many, many years. The core of it, of course, is retirement and medical. And you know some of the changes we've been going through on medical. But just so you know, approximately for every dollar we spend on salaries, depends on the category here, but another 40 cents is spent on benefits. So when we make a decision to add a new position, we have to think of that total cost. Okay, let's start out with the history here. Back in the early 90s, actually late 80s, we began, as we were maturing as a new university with professional programs and highly technical programs, such as electrical engineering, we were becoming aware of the fact that we're having a hard time recruiting good faculty. So our whole attention moved at that time to how do we get to be market. And it was a major change in philosophy for SBU. We were one of the first in the CCCU institutions, that's the Christian group of colleges, that went this way. And that is, we, instead of having salaries tied to just, if you're a professor, you get this salary no matter what department you're in. If you're an associate, you get this salary no matter what department. And it wasn't exactly like that on the staff, but there was more kind of uniformity that way on the staff side. Well, we realized that not everybody was making the equitable sacrifice to come to work for an SBU if they were a faculty member in engineering. They were making a huge sacrifice from a salary they could be making out at other institutions and even in the business world or engineering world. So we went to what they call a differential salary system based on discipline and rank. So at the end of the day, a faculty member could be making less in one discipline than a comparable faculty member in another discipline based on that market. So the whole concept of market came into being at that time. We also did the same for staff. And what we did was identify a couple external surveys that were available at that time, the main one being Coupa. I'll try to remember to define my jargon as I go through here, my acronyms. Coupa stands for the College University Personnel Association. It's the main group of within our industry that does the surveys of salaries. And so we get that information every year on every position we have. Now, not every position we have, though, is tied to Coupa. Some were tied to Hepworth at the time. We'll get more into that in a moment. So we bounced along for a while there, about a decade, and at the end of that decade, we began to ask the question, and staff asked the question, how is my salary determined? And we'd like to understand that better. So we put together a committee of faculty and staff to recommend a revision and an update to our comp plan. We brought in a consultant, and the upshot of that was a major work throughout the institution of every staff position with a updated job description. And the job descriptions had I don't want to say uniformity, but they were consistent. So we tried to use similar language for similar position and understanding how you structure a job description. And so from that, with the help of a consultant, we identified an external market, a benchmark, to go for that position. Now, in some cases, that was hard to do, but those were the minority cases. So at that time, we developed a few additional things. We got rid of one issue that we were doing before, and that was job factoring. What job factoring means is if my position has these responsibilities and the external benchmark, like Coupa or headboard, had these responsibilities, and if this one was greater than the benchmark, we would adjust it upward. If it was less, we adjust it down. That is the market value. We would adjust up or down based on that job factor. Well, we felt that was, the committee felt it was too complex to put throughout the institution, so we went away from that. And we also went away from what we called, used to, a long time ago, called a longevity factor, but it's in the industry, it's called years of service adjustment. The longer you're at the institution in your position, there should be recognition of that in terms of salary and your goal. And so we had that at one time, and we stopped that on the recommendation of the committee. So we went along with that. We're basically on this system since that time. And so you'll hear this repeated a number of times. The job description is the most important document in this whole process, because that's where the beginning begins to identify the potential salary and market goal for that position. One change that has happened since we started the plan, about 6 or 8 years ago, we added a COLI factor. Sounds like I'm talking about medicine. COLI is cost of living index. Well, how much it costs to live in Seattle versus anywhere else in the nation. And this CUPAS survey in particular is a national survey. So it's picking up salaries from institutions in high cost areas like Stanford and San Francisco area, San Jose. We have schools like Greenville and in the farmland in Illinois, who's a totally different cost structure. So we look at this information, and we then decided to take this national goal, the markets for each position now again, and increase them by that cost of living index. And I've been watching this for a number of years, and Seattle's cost of living has run anywhere from 20 to 25% higher than the rest of the nation. So we started recognizing that in our goals. And this next year, we'll be applying the latest COLI information is that it's 19% higher. So we were taking these CUPA goals and increasing them by 19%. So let's look at some of the major tenets of the plan. Each position is to have its own market benchmark updated annually. So this isn't just a one-time exercise. We look at this every year. If an external benchmark cannot be found for a position, then the average of the external markets in the same range will become the market goal for that position. And we'll look at this if we have time in a few moments how we do that. But basically, our goal is to find an external benchmark for every position, but sometimes that just doesn't work. So what do we do for those individuals? We want them to have an appropriate market goal as well. And so the decision of that process in the late 90s was, let's create a range system within all of our positions, range number, and we identify positions that have similar responsibilities and scope of duties, and we'll put them in one range, okay? And another level of responsibilities would go in another range. And so if we have a position that does not have an external benchmark, and we want one for it, we look at every other position in that ranges market, what their market benchmark is, and we average those, and that becomes the market for the person that doesn't have a goal. With the philosophy that if it's similar responsibilities and duties and scope of duties, then it makes sense to have that kind of averaging for that person. It's a reasonable fairness. As we look at, as I mentioned, we look at a number of tables. And when I say market salary, all I mean by that is what are others making in a similar position at other institutions. That's as simple as that. And the overall writing goal in all of this isn't just to have a complex system. It is to have salary base and a salary system that keeps the institution informed, to be able to recruit the best faculty and staff and to retain the best faculty and staff. So if we're not paying attention to what market is doing, that's going to be a problem. Setting of actual salaries is still within the supervisor VP discretion. Okay, so we set benchmarks, we set these goals. That doesn't set the actual salary. That informs the salary, and I'll go into that a little bit, how we do that on a formula basis. But at the end of the day, the supervisor working with the VP, or put it the other way, the VP working with the supervisor of the department, goes to make the actual salary decision for each position. And we said, as long as that salary is within 80 to 120%, you can make that, they're able to make that judgment. And they would need to get the president's approval for anything outside that range. And when we started this process in the early 90s, both faculty and staff were about 80% of the market at that time. Now remember, we're updating this annually, so the market's moving on us every year, which is a good thing. It's not a bad thing. Some people worry about that, but that's actually a good thing. This past year, in 2013, we were on average 94% of goal for all of staff. So we did make some progress over that period of time. Okay, when I say variance from market, that's the dollar amount. We can talk about it in terms of percentages too, but we really, that's the dollar amount. So if a person's goal salary is $50,000 and they're making $30,000, not 30, but a better example would be $40,000, that $10,000 difference is the variance. And we'll look at that in a little bit of detail, but person A could be 5,000 from goal, person B could be 8,000 from goal, and another person could be 500 from goal. And we'll see how all that plays out. We've, by definition and philosophy here, said equity. We want fairness and equity in this program. Equity means comparable percentage from goal. Equitable sacrifice is the way the faculty used to talk about it. Does that concept make sense in this? And then funding each year is, we get a pool. One of the things I should mention at the very outset is we can't look at salaries and compensation in isolation. Every judgment and decision we make about what to do about salaries has an impact on student tuition. 60% of our budget is compensation. So if we decide to raise employees' salaries 5%, that has probably an impact of 6% on tuition, just to a 5%, somewhere in that range. So it's a direct correlation. So in any one year, the budget planners are balancing what students can pay, how far can we increase tuition versus what we need to do with our employees. It's just that simple. And but the process here, when we're doing budget planning, by doing this update on the market and variance every year, we're looking at how far we are, and that's informing the budget process and what we do in the pool for that year. This is an easy group. By last time, we have tons of questions. Okay, here are some of the strengths of the plan. I've mentioned some of these. Annual measurement to inform management and budget planning. National surveys are adjusted to Seattle COLI, so we're taking into account the Seattle cost of living. It's an equitable approach, and when we allocate this pool of funds, the salary dollars that we have in any one year, we usually identify first a ATB, that means across the board. Everything else being equal, everybody will get a across the board increase. This year is going to be 1% because CPI and the change in CPI was very low. So the rest of that pool increase, which I think is like, what is it, Jerry, 2.5% more, that will be used to address these market variances, promotions, and some other things within the pool. And so, but taking that pool of dollars that's in the budget now and splitting it up to the various departments and VP areas is simply done by how far that unit is away from their market goals. So if you're further away, you're going to get a larger piece of that funding pie that year to help address your market salaries.
How do you know what your market salary is?
Well, this is the tables that we go out to, every year we get the survey. We participate in the survey, and so we get tables back, and we get very detailed tables identifying all the positions that have been surveyed. And so we'll look at a survey from Coupa that's for private independent colleges. We'll look at another one called private religious. Then we'll do it by private comprehensive. Then we'll do it by size of institution, 3,000 to 5,000 FTE, student body size, $100 million budget approximately. So we look at these tables and actually average for each position, the average of all those table responses. That sets the goal salary. And then that's increased by that 19%.
But how do you know what your individual?
Oh, how you know?
Yes.
We're going to get to that. Well, first of all, it has never been intended to be a secret. If you go back and read your former letter, we've always said from the president, and you get this every year, you know, if you have a question about your goal salary or your market, talk to your supervisor or talk to your area VP. And one of the reasons for this forum and discussion with the staff council is realizing that hasn't always been happening. So we want to get the word out more about what's going on. And so that's the starting point. Talk to HR about your goal. This year, for the first time, we're going to be putting in that letter that goes to everyone what everyone's percent of market is. So if your position is, if you're in a position that's 88% of market, that's the number of percent you're going to see in that letter. So we have that, and we suspect that's going to prompt additional questions by staff, which is a good thing. Okay, this year we're adding a new element. We felt like the goals that we were looking at for a number of years now were not addressing what was going on at SBU, which is a very good thing. We have many career employees, that, certainly on the faculty side, but also on the staff, that have made SBU their career. And so we want to recognize, especially the ones that are doing very well at helping the institution. And so we created a scale now to be used for every staff position that will indicate some adjustment to their goal based on how many years they've been in the position, okay? So let's turn to that and look at that. So here's the scale. This is done on a statistical basis, looking at the Coupa years of service. In other words, what the people, the institutions that are responding to the survey, they represent real people's salaries. They represent real people's years in the position. So we took data from that and created this scale. So we're going to take that market goal and we're going to adjust it downward to 95% of that goal, the person's just starting out in the first 3 years. When they hit their 4th year, they'll be at the 100% of that goal, and then you can see the changes thereafter. And the 4th to 9 happens to represent the average of the years of service, looking at those tables, plus or minus 1 standard deviation. What that means is 68% of the positions in Coupa represent people who have been in their position 4 to 9 years. So that represents our 100% goal. So that's a new feature this year, and this will be given to each VP and if they distribute it to the supervisors, they'll see that kind of detail.
So if you're in that very first category, 0 to 3 years, and you're in your 2nd year, for instance, does that mean your salary is actually going to go down?
This has nothing to do with your salary directly.
Okay.
This is your goal. So if you were at 100%, you're just starting on your position in your 2nd year, and last year you had a goal and it showed up with your actual salary that we were at 90% of that goal. By this, adjusting it this way, you actually may be showing up at 92% of your goal. this year, okay? The opposite will happen on the other side, right? So I can't stress enough remind everybody that the market amounts is a guide, not a determinant of the salary. Yeah.
And if I understand you correctly, that it's differentiating between years in your position versus years of service to the university?
Right.
Can you talk to us more about why that decision was made to focus on years in a particular position rather than years at the university?
Because we think that's the data in Cuba, for number one, and that's being measured. And in fact, I think that's the data that they're asking for when we fill in the survey, is the number of years. So that's the data we have to work with. Also, we want to recognize that with experience in a position comes hopeful improvement in mastery of that position. And so if there's a dramatic change in positions, if I were, for instance, to transfer to the faculty, that would be a dramatic change in position. And I would go back to as though I'm starting out. And that's the third thing. Okay, here are the weaknesses of the plan, as we've seen it in working out these number of years. First of all, because of the various cycles we've gone through on a budget, an annual budget process, like going through the recession in late 2000, we haven't had sufficient budget to make the same progress every year. So that's been one weakness of the plan. We're finding out that the Higher Education Personnel Board survey is not a very good or reliable survey. Fortunately, not a high number of positions are tied to that, and we're trying to reduce that. And that is because it's a political document more than it is a market survey. It's driven by politics, it's driven by the budget in the state, and this drives the public institutions. Not all VPs and supervisors are equally rigorous in being sure each salary decision is thought through carefully. I mentioned this before. In some years, we've gotten back sheets from various areas to issue the letters, and we could tell they've not done a lot of change to those salaries. They just take the formula out. I'm going to explain the formula in a moment. And so we don't think everybody is equally performing or have the same contribution to a department as everybody else. It's not all equal, so we depend on the supervisors to make that judgment call. So if you have a brand new person in a position that is far from their market, why would you give that person the larger increase compared to someone who's a proven winner in that department, is a leader, is really the success of the department, who's at their goal or right below their goal? And that's where we want the supervisors to step in and make those judgment calls. Does that make sense?
Will someone hold them accountable to that this year? Like, if that's been the case before, like, who holds them accountable to being more?
The VPs are supposed to hold them accountable.
But then the VPs are the ones who kind of checks the VPs as far as.
Then it'll be the president.
Wondering if there's like.
That's what hierarchy is all about. Yeah. I mean, you'll hear this from Gary in a moment, but you need to start out with your supervisor and really, we hope the interchange, this will improve the interchange between the supervisor and staff. I mean, everyone in this room is either a supervisor or a subordinate, right? And you have both roles in play. Yes, sir.
So you said the money was allocated based on the variance from the goals to each VP area?
Yeah.
Does that mean that each VP area individually for last year, for example, was 94% from the goal?
No, that's the entire institution. Different VP areas might vary from, I'm trying to think now, may vary from 88% to 96%, somewhere in there. But, so it depends on a lot of factors that created that. In some areas, it had significant market rounds that are faster than other areas. I know of one area that we've tracked for a number of years, and that is advancement people. Fundraising positions are very competitive right now. It's hard to find good funders, and so the market has drifted up. faster than other positions.
So they would be lower.
Then they would have a greater variance and closer to it. I mean, and more funding to go to that area.
Might get to this a little bit further down the presentation, but can you speak at some point to timing in terms of, either etiquette or just knowledge of the university calendar of talking with supervisors, or as a supervisor talking with employees around that decision-making timeframe and what those conversations and timing can look like?
I'm going to give you a little bit of an answer now, and Gary's going to get into this a little bit more. Our budget's set in February every year, and that's when we start the process with salaries. Faculty get their salary letters in early April, late March, and staff get it late June. So right now is we're within the next, 2 weeks, Jerry, that these distribution sheets will be sent out to the VP areas. It's a big production, a lot of detail, and then we, from that data, we got to get it back in, process it, and then issue a letter. So it's a time-consuming process. I think part of your question is how do I influence my goal salary, perhaps? What's my goal for my salary position? Gary's going to get into that in much more detail than this, but the basic thing that drives it is your job description. So if you think your job description is out of date, start talking to your supervisor anytime and get it in the process. We ask for any major reclasses going on that are intended by VPs in February after the budget's set. We start asking them that information because, as Gary will indicate, he's got a big pile of classifications to go through. So that's an intense time. We're in a budget cycle. Funding can only be provided so often, so that's the natural flow. Now, occasionally we do have promotions and changes during the year, and it's up to the VP and supervisor to get the funding to put that together. So, I mean, you'll see that in a moment in the slide. I don't want to imply that it's stuck in the budget cycle, but that's the main time to do it. We need a standard funding requirement when new positions are created. Because supervisors are creative and want to get the best people, and they need a new position, sometimes they cobble together the funding they can to get a position. And when it's classified, we find out, that's only 80% of the goal. And the rest of the staff in that department are, let's say, at 88% of the goal. And so then we've got a variance created immediately. And I think we need to have a discussion how we address that and maybe require some standard of minimum level of funding when you create a new position so it doesn't start out so below goal if funding is a problem. Now, the other weakness, I don't know if this is a weakness, this is just a feature of what we're doing, is market can go down as much as they go up. And now it's been much more frequent that they go up, but occasionally we see positions, external market go down. And we've built in a protection so that if that happens 1 year, we don't immediately reduce the goal, we revert to the last year's goal. But if that market stays down on a continuous basis, it will impact the goal of that position. Keep in mind that actual salaries can vary from 80 to 120 of that goal.
Is the market that we're comparing to, is it just private institutions? Or
Yes, just privates. If you look at the surveys, you would be thankful for that because the publics are quite a bit more. They're much more impacted by state funding, which has been a problem in the last 6-7 years. Is there another question? Okay, so let's get into a little bit of detail and try to make this easy. I hope you can see that. So what I have here is a number of positions. This would be not unlike what a VP and supervisor will see for their area. They're not going to have that quite a range of classification ranges in a department, but this is just for illustration. So just to show you the kind of information you have, or the VP will have, you'll have budget funding, okay? How much is budgeted for that position, what their current salary is, what this market benchmark is for that position. So that top position of $44,000 is a result of that table averaging I was talking about, times 1.19, a 19% increase for COLI. And now in the future, it will be, that amount will be after the adjustment for years of service. Okay, so that's the end result of all those calculations. That's the market benchmark. The next column is the variance. And then you have percent of goal. Now you'll notice in the variance, that dollar amount, it's a large amount, small amount, it's a negative amount. The negative amount indicates that the actual salary is above market, not below it. Now we have many more that are below market than we do above, and you'll see the distribution in a moment. Then we look at percent of goals. That's a percentage like that's going to show up in your letter, okay, this year, on a slightly different basis, but it's going to be very close to that. Then this is where the funding comes in. So let's say we have enough funding to address 15% of the total variance in the institution that year, plus the ATB, the across the board, in this illustration 1.5. So that's how we come up with the two amounts. So this 465 is 15% of that variance, okay? And 614 is 1.5% of this actual salary, all right? Those $2 amounts are added together, and the year-to-year increase is 2.64% for that position. Notice the next position, it's already over goal. And so it doesn't have a negative variance. It doesn't get a variance funding, it gets the ATB. So if you've got a person in that position, the thought is, and you've got the leader in the department who's doing great guns, you may not want to leave it at 1.5. That's up to the supervisor and the VPs, but that's where the judgment call is to come in.
A question about position 7. Why, if that current position is already above the goal, why would the budget be set so high?
Well, a lot of reasons. That's a good point. No one caught that before, but that I intended to put that down because some, I would say 90% of the time, you have budget equal to the salary. Okay, that's the fundamental thing. But sometimes a brand new person will come in a position, and the supervisor's judgment is not to bring them immediately to full salary. We want to see how they perform. So they'll keep the funding in place so they have dollars to make that adjustment later on. That's the typical case.
But for this year, for example, they can use the rest of that money to spend.
No. Well, they could, if they had a temporary person they could hire. But remember, well, we use the term, again, sorry for the jargon, permanent funding. These are base salaries. So if you were to use that extra funding in that position for another person's base salary, you lost it for that position. Thank you for that question. So you can see the various illustrations there of how dollar amounts are calculated for increase and the resulting year-to-year increase in a person's salary. If you made no other adjustment, that's just follow the formula. That's the formula right there. Any other questions?
So as a supervisor, do you have access, like can we call HR and have access to a chart similar to this that has our employees and
Well, if you're, again, I can't speak to how every vice president distributes its sheets, but typically they would give that supervisor for that department a listing that's not identical to this because there's more detail on it, but similar to this for all the staff that report to that supervisor. Does that make sense?
So it's a definition of a supervisor, like I'm a supervisor, but I have a director over me who is over our entire department. So is the definition of supervisor what I would be, or is it our director?
Each area does it differently. I suspect, Gary, I don't know if you have an answer to this, but my reading of it would be that most stop at the director level for the salary issue. But I don't know that for sure. And the reason for that is the directors are responsible for the budget and usually the ultimate hiring and firing positions. Because departments are so large, they may need middle managers below the director level, but usually the director is all accountable for staffing and budget. Okay, let me move on. So this is just a quick illustration, what we talked about earlier. This doesn't impact very many positions, but this is how we calculate the goal salary for a position that doesn't have, we can't find a good external benchmark. So we take all of these external benchmarks. This happens to be an actual pull from our file last year of EO2. These are all the EO2 benchmarks, not their salaries, but the benchmarks for those positions. And we take the arithmetic average of those, and we will apply as the goal for someone in EO2 that doesn't have an external benchmark. That is their goal salary, $52,263.
How do you know if you're in EO1 versus EO2? Is that information? That you
Well, I think the most important thing for you to know is if you have an external benchmark. Then if you have an external benchmark, it doesn't matter which of the range is. And that's what drives it for you. If you don't have an external benchmark, then that range number becomes important. And your supervisor and HR both would have that information. That's why, by the way, several years ago, we stopped putting the range number in the salary letter because some years, because of the way the surveys come back and the way the markets break, some person might jump a range or drop a range, and they were worried about that. And it had no impact on their salary. So we said that's confusing information. We'll not put that out. And then finally, a couple more notes here. This is where we stand right now. I mentioned that earlier, 94% of goal. You can see these are just a distribution of actual percent of goals for staff last July. So I counted up, these are all full-time positions, 313 individual positions, and we had some positions that, if this is 80% at the bottom right here, and this is 120% of the average of the within that range. Most people fall within that. A few above there's the 120, but that's the 100% mark. So there's a few salaries above the 100% here, and a few below the 80%. That's the distribution. Then finally, how do staff get a raise? We covered a lot of this during the annual budget cycle. The ATB moved to market, percentage of variance, and the adjustments the VP and directors want to make, supervisors want to make. And then outside of the major budget cycles, you can sometimes get a promotion, change of jobs, new position, or expansion of your current position if your director and VP can fund it. So those are the basic ways in the institution. Yes, sir.
So then adjustments by the supervisor, that's really a zero-sum game, right? If they decide I get money, someone else in my department gets less.
Yeah. They will pool money. And some areas will do it with across departments. So when I had 5 or 6 areas that I was responsible for, I would keep back a small dollar pool for any special request, and then within that, each department had to adjust it within it. So each department has their own management approach to that, or each VP area. Any other questions? Okay.
We have a question back here.
With the push for the $15 minimum wage hike in Seattle, do you see that affecting salaries or salary goals?
Well, eventually it'll have impact on salary. We've had that as a goal for staff for some time. Actually, we don't talk about it in terms of our hourly rate. We talk about annual salary trying to be above $30,000 for every position, which is about $15 an hour. So there's very few positions left that are not at that level, and it will impact our student population quite a bit, $15. The latest word on that is it's going to have something from a 5 to 7 year phase-in for nonprofit organizations, which would include colleges.
So if students start making $15 an hour, there could be some real inequity that a student worker could be making close to what a staff member is making.
Right. And that's what I meant by inflationary pressure to be met. Okay.
another quick comment on that last question. I don't think any final decisions have been made on that whole $15 an hour question, and I know there are people pushing back on what about student, employees and whatnot. So that's a discussion that's taking place in the city of Seattle. I'm not personally aware of how well that's being received or where that will end up, but certainly that's been noted and questioned. So I want to take a 50,000-foot view that Don's been presenting of how the whole system works and bring it back down a little bit more personally to maybe you and your position, and how do we look at this from an individual point of view. And as Don already mentioned briefly, where do we start? I think that really the question is we start with the job description. And so if you have not looked at your job description recently, or your supervisor has not looked at your job description recently, that's a very good place to start. And if you don't know, then that means you probably haven't looked at it recently. So if you don't have a copy of your own job description, ask for it. Ask your supervisor, can I see my job description? We work hard in HR to try and catch these things, but it's interesting that every once in a while I will still run across one that was written or updated last in 1998. Which is when some of these latest changes in the system took place when the consultants were here. And I'm looking at that and going, okay, do the math. However many years ago that is, 16 years ago. Very unlikely that job hasn't changed some in 16 years. So it behooves you and us both to say, well, how is that job description doing? And for several reasons. You can see here, if that position is going to be replaced, somebody's moved on and you're now hiring a new person, doesn't it make sense to have an accurate job description so you know what you're hiring for, and so that person coming in knows what they're signing on for? So certainly at the point that there's turnover, we hope that these job descriptions are updated. Obviously this whole discussion today is about setting the right salary, and we're going to talk about that just a bit more here in a minute. And one of the points of it we'll talk about is exempt versus non-exempt, so I'll get into that in just a moment. But future performance evaluations as well, which is not today's topic, and I know there's lots of questions out there about performance management, performance evaluation, and we probably will have a future topic. Where's our staff council people? We'll be willing to talk about that, and it's something that HR is working on. We'll be bringing some proposals to SLT about how do we improve across the boards, across campus, our performance management system. So it's something that I think is important to people, and much of it ought to be rooted right back in that job description. Why are you here? What is your job supposed to be? And do we all understand it the same way? So I'd say for a lot of the questions that people have, this is where you start. Find out what your own job description currently says, and have that discussion with your supervisor. And no, it doesn't have to be only during that annual budget cycle we talked about. You can do that any time of year. In fact, maybe off budget cycle is a great time to start that conversation so that you can ramp up before budget cycle starts. And now you've already done the groundwork. You've evaluated that job description. You've agreed with your supervisor that it needs to be revised. You've looked at it together and gotten something that's accurate that you agree on. And now we can look at some of the next steps. The next thing that usually happens is that HR is asked to do what's called a classification review. So if there is a new job description, an updated job description, a whole new position, whatever it may be, and part of that budget cycle we talked about, I get a stack of these things every spring. In late February, March, through end of March, I get a stack of them. I don't know how many I did this year, probably 50 of them. And each one takes time because we're trying to look very specifically at a couple of key questions. One of them is this exempt versus non-exempt question. I get this a lot. I have a supervisor that says, I'd like to make this position exempt. And the reason, of course, usually is why?
Saves the supervisor.
Yeah, well, yeah, it saves some money, but also saves having to track hours and turn in hours the same way. There's no overtime involved. Well, yeah, exempt from what? It's exempt essentially from overtime pay. And so this is a federal law, the federal FLSA, Fair Labor Standards Act, and basically the Department of Labor assumes all positions are non-exempt. In other words, all positions should be paid overtime if they work more than 40 hours in a given work week, unless you can prove otherwise, unless you can prove an exemption. And so that's what the word exempt means. It's exempt from overtime laws. And so we don't do exemptions. We don't look at a position and say, let's just make it exempt because I don't want to pay overtime. You can't do that. Or because I don't want to do the paperwork. An exemption is based on specific allowable exemptions, and there's 6 of them. Only a couple of them that tend to apply to us regularly here on campus. Executive exemption, pretty self-explanatory. Someone's a director or vice president is probably going to be an executive exemption. But it's that second one, administrative exemption, that we will look at most closely for most people and to see if it applies. I'm not going to bore you with all the details, but I will say that federal law is squishy in some of their terminology and some of the things that they ask us to evaluate. Does it have certain kinds of authority, certain kinds of decision making, et cetera, et cetera. And it's a bit of a judgment call. And so I have a worksheet. I will often send it back to supervisors to say, if they're asking, hey, I want to make this exempt. We look at not the title, by the way, but the job duties. So we're going to look at the actual duties, the actual responsibilities, and say, is that job description accurate first? And if it is, then let's look at the duties, let's look at the exemption worksheet from the federal government, and let's agree on whether or not this position should be exempt or not. If in doubt, frankly, I'm going to leave it non-exempt. Because, and you say, why does this matter? If we classify a position incorrectly and put you as exempt instead of non-exempt, where we're no longer paying overtime, then if we were ever to be audited or investigated, we could receive huge fines as well as back overtime, assumed overtime that was now missed because you were misclassified. So we do have to try and do this as carefully as possible. So if I push back to supervisors sometimes, that's not because I'm trying to be hard to get along with. Well, I might be. But mostly because we are trying to do it well and do it correctly. And sometimes it really does not warrant that switch from non-exempt over to exempt. And sometimes if you're non-exempt, you might prefer to stay non-exempt because if they're working you a lot of hours, you want to be paid that overtime. Obviously, managers are looking at that and going, I don't have an overtime budget, so I have to try and keep people working within a 40-hour work week. So it's a give and take. It's a thoughtful process, and we all have to understand it the same way, whether you're a supervisor or not. So that's one of the first things we evaluate on that new position, or if there's a position that has significantly changed and I'm being asked to classify it. So it's exempt versus non-exempt. The other part, of course, as we've been talking about today, is this whole salary. How do we set the salary? I'm not going to reiterate everything Don said, of course, but we have benchmarks, or we try to have benchmarks for every single position. So pretty much everybody in this room ought to have an accurate job description and a classification that has provided one or more benchmarks for your position. And again, this is something you can ask your supervisor as a starting point. If that doesn't help, or they don't know, or whatever, feel free to come to HR, but I prefer you start with your supervisors. And those benchmarks come from these salary surveys Don was talking about, Coupa being the main one from higher education across the country. Milliman, I don't think you talked about a whole lot, but that's a local Puget Sound area. And it's not higher ed, it's all kinds of businesses. So lumped into that would be the Boeings and the Microsofts and the Amazons and whatnot. And companies large and small that happen to subscribe to Milliman. So they participate in providing data to Milliman, but they also get the data back like we do. So there are a number of positions that we use Milliman for, and then some that use Hep B, that's that state, so it's also local. So almost every position has at least one, some have 2 or more. And what we're trying to do, again, going back to that accurate job description, we're trying to say how many external benchmarks do we need to accurately describe your position. Sometimes that can be done with just one, it's very clear. Director of admissions, or chief admissions officer, or something like that. So one position from Coupa that does it, says it well. But let me give you an example here, and this is a partially real example. Names have been changed to protect the innocent. Let's take a hypothetical SPU program coordinator position, because we got some questions here. I would like to know why some departments have administrative assistants and others have program coordinators. That was a question that was submitted in advance. And by the way, I had another one submitted that I thought was fun. It says, is there a time when so many quote unquote duties as assigned have been added to a person's job over 15 plus years that it would fall into a different classification? It's actually a different job. I thought that was a good question. And that's why you need to go back and look at these job descriptions and go, yeah, it's morphed, it's evolved, it's not what it was 5, 10, 15 years ago. And we need to ask these questions. And so how do I know if I'm a program coordinator or administrative assistant was this person's question. And I will say that these are going to be based again on the job duties, that job description, not on the title. There are times when we may have something that's called administrative assistant in one department, maybe called program coordinator in another. Sometimes I'll catch that and I'll question it, and I'll push back a little bit. Is that really how you want to title this? But really more important is, what are the actual job duties? And then how do I find these benchmarks? So here's an example of a program coordinator, this one's real, where we assigned 2 external benchmarks. The first one is that Milliman PSR 1.03, and notice what it is. It's Administrative Assistant 3. The title of the position is Program Coordinator, but the benchmark, and if you read the duties in the benchmark, and I gave you some of them, I didn't print the whole thing out, they describe a good bit of the actual job description for this person. It's a Program Coordinator here at SPU. And then notice I added a second benchmark, that's that HEP B107N. Well, hey, there we have the Program Coordinator title for that one, but again, it's the description and how it matches the duties that we have. And together, these 2 benchmarks, these 2 external benchmarks, told at least 80% of the story for our position, for this Program Coordinator in this particular department. So that was the benchmark, that was the classification that we came up with for this position. I didn't put real dollars on here, but you'll notice that each of those 2 benchmark positions would have a dollar amount, and I would have averaged those 2 together, and they came up with a goal salary for this person. So that's how that process works. So pretty much everybody here should have a classification review that shows 1 or 2 or sometimes even 3 benchmark positions that are averaged, and that's where your goal salary comes from. Yep.
I assume PWCs are indicating that there's a lot more to this.
Correct.
Just looking at these, I wouldn't necessarily say it's the same jobs.
They're not the same jobs, but together they tell the story of our job. In fact, that's why you would use 2 different ones, is because one of them would have part of the description that tells the story of our job. The other one would have some of the rest. And together they tell the whole story, or at least 80% or better. So you're right, those aren't the same, but you're also right, there's more to both of us. So. Other questions on that? Does that kind of give you a bit of a feel for how your own personal job description is important and where your own personal goal salary would come from? So that goal salary that Don was talking about gets plugged into all these formulas, and how far are you from variance with your actual salary? But this is how your goal salary is set. Okay, any other questions on that? Wow, we're all experts, that's great. So just a quick reminder that besides salary, when we talk about compensation, compensation is made up of salary and benefits. So remember that there's all kinds of wonderful benefits that are provided at a place like SPU. And some of these we don't think about all that often, like FICA. Well, that's the half of it is taken out of your pay, so you contribute. The other half you don't kind of ever see, but it's contributed by SPU. Is contribute the right word when the government compels you to do something? We're glad to do it, okay. The next 7.65% of your salary goes straight to the federal government every month to cover your Social Security and Medicare for something that will never happen to anybody in this room, but old age. We obviously also cover medical, dental, vision for employees. And that's over $600 a month value right there, depending on which plan you choose and this, that, and the other. If you're on the high deductible plan and you're having an HSA plan, we're contributing a considerable amount of money over the course of the year to that. And you can see down the line, life insurance, short-term and long-term disability, workers' compensation, another one you don't see much, but it's there in the background. Sick and vacation allowance, of course, is a big deal for us, and you see that and what your balances are, but there's a cost to that the university incurs. And on down the line, retirement, 9%. And I can tell you that several years ago, during the downturn in the economy, a number of our peer colleges were reducing the amount that they were contributing to employees' retirement plans. And 9% is already on the upper end of where a lot of comparable colleges are. There's a couple higher that I know of, but not many. And some were reducing it further down below where they were. SPU has held firm on medical and dental and held firm on retirement. And that's been a high value, and I know that leadership spends a lot of time kind of agonizing over how to make sure we do this well. So you get the idea, all the way down to KC discounts and transportation for van pools and car pools and even discounts on events here on campus. So there's a lot of exciting things that are benefits. And the bottom line, and Don mentioned this earlier, but between 35 and 47% of your salary is added on top for the benefits, depending on where your salary is. And so if you look at, on average, another 40 cents on the dollar that the total budget has to be in order to have your position or add a new position. And so that adds up to quite a bit of value. Just a quick commercial break before we go on. Today's Wednesday, right? How many, no, okay, I won't ask. Ask yourself, how many people in this room have not yet finished open enrollment?
I'm watching.
Oh, Carrie's here. Just a quick reminder, you've got until Friday this week, open enrollment closes. So if you haven't had a chance to get on there and do that, especially if you do want to make any changes, please don't forget. And of course, Carrie is always available to answer any question that you may have. Why are you frowning at me? So don't forget open enrollment. Now, we wanted to allow a little bit of time for our second topic this afternoon, which is things related to staff training and development. This is a shorter topic because we don't have as much to talk about, but I wanted to give you a glimpse of some things that are coming. Sort of, you heard it here first kind of a thing. You already know that we've done things, I guess you call this training, when we ask you or require you to do it, right? Preventing discrimination and harassment is something that everyone will have done when they first hired on. If you've been here a long time, you also know that, well, now 3.5 years ago, we had the entire campus do it again. We took a refresher course. It was a different course than you probably had taken the 3 years before. And that actually became a mandate from our senior leadership team to say that that will be something that we do every 3 years. By the way, in California, it's something you have to do every year. So, which may not be a bad idea, but we haven't gotten to that point. But we will be introducing something new here later this summer that you'll be hearing more about, that will be the refresher for this topic. You've also, when you hired on, you did FERPA, or you should have. If you use our computer systems at all, you'll do FERPA. Probably did hazardous materials. And you might have taken some desktop courses like Excel. In fact, we have our guru here in the back of the room. I saw Dick Slate walk in. He's one of the people that have been very faithful at trying to bring classes to us over the years. But that may be about it, unless your department has sent you to some special training or you've done some other kind of trainings with your department. So we're beginning to ask the question, how can we provide better and a wider variety of not just online, but online and live training as part of staff development here at SPU. So I wanted to introduce something that we're working on right now. It's not out there yet, but we're signed on with a group called Skillsoft, and we're in the implementation stages and testing stages right now. You'll be able to do some very interesting things with individual courses in a wide variety of topics. I'm going to show you here in just a second. And it'll be integrated where it's all online, but we can also do live trainings where we can perform, that's not the right word, we can conduct a class here on campus, but have you sign up for it through their system. And waitlist it if it's full, and get your certificate at the end if you complete the class. So whether it's online or whether it's what they call instructor-led training, live trainings, we're going to have a system in place that allows all of us to have some interesting training opportunities. So some of the courseware topics that we're looking at and that we're bought into in our first contract, there's a whole suite called business skills courseware. And under each of these bullet points, there could be literally hundreds of titles. And we're going to be trying to introduce titles in smaller groupings at a time so that it's not like drinking out of a fire hose. So you're not going to see all of this at first. We have to vet this just a little bit. But you will begin to see things in professional effectiveness, management and leadership, project effectiveness, business strategy and operations, and on down. They even have classes that can help you with certification in different fields. For instance, in HR, you can get a PHR or a SPHR certification by taking tests through the professional association, but they will have training to help you prepare for those things that are right here on this system. And that will probably be true in a number of other areas. There's also desktop skills. Now, I haven't told Dick about this, so I probably should prepare you for this. But this will include online training that you can do at your desktop in the whole Microsoft Office suite, Word, Excel, PowerPoint, and more. I just gave a few examples here. Adobe Acrobat and all kinds of other things. So things that would be useful to virtually all of us in doing our jobs day to day, you can have further training on at your desktop. So you can do this from home as well, because it's all web-based. So you don't have to be here to do it. Now, if it's not absolutely required for your job, you're going to talk to your supervisor about whether you can spend job time doing these trainings. So that'll have to be a conversation. I don't think we're going to have any hard and fast rules, but I know that's going to be asked, so I'll preempt the question. Anything that's required, like preventing sexual harassment and FERPA, of course, that's job related. You can do that on job time. Anything else that can be made available to you, you'll just need to work that out with your supervisor. And sometimes your supervisor may be the one assigning you to do something. I want you to really get to know PowerPoint better. Please use job time to do that because I've got projects for you, obviously. So that'll be an ongoing discussion and a coming discussion. This is a fun one for us. We just love compliance. He says with tongue in cheek. But it's important. And so a lot of this will be primarily aimed at supervisors, but that doesn't mean that other people might not be interested. So if you really like wage and hour law and would like to know more about overtime pay and exempt versus non-exempt and those kind of things, you'd be welcome to take these courses. What about HIPAA, FERPA? There's really a very good FERPA training on there that we're going to be looking at. ADA, which is disabilities, but it's actually ADAA now, it's slightly changed, that's my shorthand. EEO, so discrimination laws. Title VII, Title VI, Title VII, Title IX, so those are, Title IX is particularly geared for higher ed. Environmental health and safety issues. So we're going to have a number of things, a couple of which will be probably required, some of which may be required more for supervisors than anybody else, and some of which will be totally optional but would be highly recommended. And we'll try and make those available and understood as to what are the topics, how are they available, and we might even begin to start packaging these in a way that you can say, well, here's a logical progression of things that might be really helpful if you are a supervisor or if you are in certain kinds of jobs. The system, the learning management system that we're going to be signing on to with Skillsoft is going to allow us to do all kinds of interesting groupings. As I mentioned, supervisor training, so we're going to have a grouping of all people that are supervisors. And there's just over 100 people on our campus that are classified as supervisors. That means somebody reports to them. And so with supervisors, we're going to be setting up some regiment of potential trainings that will be just for you. But we can do things other ways too. So departments, a whole department might want to go through a certain study or a certain course together. Everybody needs to learn PowerPoint, or everybody wants to learn Excel. Or there's a business course that your supervisor thinks is great, and we want us to all go through that together. So whole departments can do that. And we may well have other groupings as well that we'll put together as we get into it, as we learn how to use the system, and as we get feedback. I mean, this is going to be a process of understanding the potential of a system like this that we can all learn from. And as I mentioned before, this will allow for some live, what we call instructor-led training. So we will be doing even some supervisor training will be live classes here on campus. And we may well have other kinds of classes, but that you can sign up for them here. You'll be made aware of them through this system, and then you can sign up and go to the class. So we'll be telling you more about those things as we go along. When is this going to be available? We hope that the first part of it will be available by this sometime this summer, maybe late summer. And most likely that first part will be the updated Preventing Discrimination and Harassment training, that 3-year refresher cycle that I mentioned. That'll probably be the first thing, and that's for everybody, unless you've been here less than 3 years. So most of you will be hearing from us about that when it's ready. Probably for staff, we may roll that out this summer. For faculty, we probably won't start until they're back this fall. There's additional modules that we'll be adding, as I mentioned, particularly those desktop trainings like Excel and Word. We'll be adding those fairly quickly. Some of the others will add a little bit at a time as we have ability to discern which ones are the best, instead of just dumping 1,000 topics out there and saying, hey, have fun. We want it to make sense. There's also what's called a Books 24/7 option that I believe is available for pretty much all of these topic areas that we just discussed: management, business side, even the desktop side, and the compliance side. And so it's amazing, you'll have literally thousands of titles of books that can be made available to read online I believe, and I'm still learning how this part works, I believe you can actually download parts of them if you have your own Kindle or something like that through this system. But I don't believe you can download entire books that way because of the arrangements with the publishers. But having some of these things available for further personal study, maybe a whole group wants to study again a management book by somebody, and they do keep up with titles from the current year. So that'd be interesting for us to investigate and explore this together. So I just wanted to give you that bit of a glimpse. I don't have all the answers yet. I just wanted to let you know it's coming because I know we get questions. Well, how can I develop? How can I have personal development plan? This is not the only answer, but this is part of what we're going to try and put in place that gives you and your supervisor even an opportunity to work through a personal development plan in a career improvement goal. So any questions on this or on the salary information that we discussed earlier?
Nothing at all.
Oh, there's one right here.
In terms of the professional development, I know at the former institution I worked at, you kind of had a sense of how much for your position was allocated or encouraged, but I have a little harder time understanding SPU's like approach to professional development, if it's by position or by kind of need within jobs. Maybe just speak to the sense of like whether it's used for conferences or skill training or how that kind of gets identified.
Well, if I understand your question, I'm not sure there is a holistic approach to how we should be doing staff development, and that's part of what we want to work on. This becomes a tool that can help us move down the road. And I hate to keep coming back to saying this only, but you and your supervisor should be talking about these things. And what we'll be doing as we develop supervisor training is helping us as supervisors understand how we can work with people in evaluation, which we haven't talked about much yet, including personal development plans that go along with that. So, but in the meantime, it's just like your job description is something you can grab a hold of and say, tell me more about this, let's look at it. Certainly as tools are made available to you, there's nothing stopping you from having that conversation with your supervisor and saying, I would like to develop a personal development plan, and coming with your own ideas. Could we do better across the board with all of us? Yes, and I think we will as we move forward. Yeah.
Does each department have an allocation for professional development funding? So sending people to conferences, paying for their classes, those types of things?
I don't have any way of knowing that. I think they have the possibility of it. Go ahead.
There is funds by VP area, and typically they are kept at the VP level. There's a pool, and then the directors make requests for that particular year. So I'd start with your supervisor, director, VP. I know a couple of VP areas have taken it, instead of making it Mother May I every year, have distributed it out to the individual departments to make the allocation. And then had any excess reserves at the VP area to address any special things. One of the things that we do at SBU is budget on a full employment basis. What that means is we budget assuming everybody's going to be in their position all year long. But that never happens. We always have some level of turnover. And many departments will use that temporary savings from that turnover to address professional.
Sure.
Don, do you want to clarify or touch on the fact that with COLI, we went 19% this year, but in the past, we paralleled the faculty side, but in the past we were at 10%. So some of the percentages that you listed or stated might change.
Yeah, thank you. 10%, we had been recognized the difference between Seattle cost of living and the national surveys, as they indicated some years ago. We were ratcheting that up. I mean, it was just increasing the goal when we did that. And so we said, are we just shooting ourselves in the foot by doing this? And we said, no, good information is premier, let's do it. And so we started ratcheting it up. And a year ago, 2013, we were at 10%. But after the discussion really led on the faculty side, faculty affairs, we just said, let's quit playing the game, let's just adjust it. for what it is. So all of a sudden, goals are going to go up. Now, anybody who's got a Coupa goal is going to go up almost additional factor of 2 on that COLA, okay? So positions that were, say, 82% of goal might all of a sudden be 78% of goal. And we just talked about this at senior leadership team because we don't have a huge pool of like 3.5% this year. This is something we'll have to watch for future years, but we're not going to make any changes in this year's pool allocation. And so we'll have to deal with that. But so there might be a handful of people that get a letter out that says, well, you're 78% of goal or something below 80%. And that could be totally driven by that increase in COLA. We warn the faculty and should warn the staff that that COLA moves on us. And so I've seen it as high as 125% of the national average. It's 119%. So if it jumps on us again, we may be further behind. And that was particularly important to the faculty because they have some sense that they want to be improving their percentage. I told them I'd rather get the pay than the percentage, but the variance is, that's what I say, variance is important and because it's being adjusted every year on an annual basis. And quite frankly, if that stops, that our salary system is going to stop with it. So variance is good, it's not bad in the long run.
A lot of information for one day. Any other questions? Okay. Does the council have any closing remarks they'd like to make?
Thank you for coming and thank you for speaking this day. If you have any more questions or issues that are burning in your mind, you have a staff council member that's kind of designated to your VP area. So we provided a council member spreadsheet back on the back counter. So if you're wondering which staff council representative is your advocate, you can check one of these out. We also have a gift card taped under a chair. So if you'll reach underneath your chair and see if you are a lucky winner. If nobody is sitting in the chair, because I didn't see where it was put, everybody reach to the chair in front of you if there's nobody in front of you. Do we have a winner? We do! And we want this conversation to keep going, so please talk to your supervisors, please contact HR, contact your staff council representative, and come to the President's Forum on Thursday. There's always really good food, and you get to honor your fellow staff members and faculty. So, hope to see you there. Thank you.